All right, I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm looking over here at the audio and the chat down on the bottom. I can see we got audio coming in here, and you folks can see me. I'm glad to know that. This is the foreclosure update that we do every Friday here, reaching out both to existing clients and to use some new clients out there and potential friends and clients of the firm. The objective of this seminar is to provide to all of you the most current information in foreclosure and what's happening in foreclosure courts and courtrooms all across the state, so that you'll be both informed clients and informed citizens. Um, just as last week, what we're doing here is giving you an update on what's happening just this week. The disclaimer that I give at the beginning of every one of these seminars is that this is not legal advice. It's merely educational in nature. It's a public service that I'm providing to consumers. If you are represented by an attorney, good. Continue to communicate effectively with your attorney and demand that communication back from your attorney. But to the extent that any legal information is being provided, this is just specific to the state of Florida. I'm only licensed in the state of Florida. I only provide any guidance or advice to those in the state of Florida. With that in mind, there's been a lot of press and a lot of talk and communication about what's happening now in the state of Florida with this brand new foreclosure law that just came into effect July 1. Even those of us that have been involved in the ground level for many months with the legislation from the beginning are still trying to sort out exactly how this is going to impact both cases that are filed after July 1 and those cases that are filed before. For all of my existing clients, you know that we are doing some additional pleading and some work laws. And for new clients that come in, we are looking at that law and making sure that we're in compliance with some of these new tricky, confusing, and downright nonsensical provisions of the law. Now, one important warning that I give to everybody out there, you folks know that for many years I've been a great supporter of the pro se litigant. If you can't afford to hire an attorney, file documents on your own behalf, do what you can to support and protect your family by filing pleadings in court. Also for realtors have been providing advice to clients saying, file something with the court that'll prevent the foreclosure from going forward. That might have been acceptable advice under some circumstances prior to this new law, but one of the dramatic changes that comes as a result of the new law is that no longer applies. If you are a consumer and just filing something, or if you're a realtor advising a consumer just to file something, you need to understand that because of this new law, you're going to get caught in a real bad circumstance. You can't do that. You have to have an attorney that can comply with the technical provisions of this. And as I said from the beginning, and I repeat often, even for those of us that have been involved in this from the very beginning, we're not exactly sure how this thing works. And so it's taken a lot of resource and effort on our part to get started with it. Something that I'll continue to talk about is this national mortgage settlement. I'm going to throw a link up here a little bit later, which is the video that I did taking apart the national mortgage settlement a year ago when it was first entered into and demonstrating the problems with it. As this thing has rolled out now after a year, the settlement is even worse than we could have predicted in terms of the impact that's having on consumers. Here in the state level, specifically in Florida, what the national mortgage settlement means is that they have provided resources to the court system, and the court system is using that to go against consumers in a really dramatic way. I say this here, and I'll say it again and again. Homeowners are under attack like never before. The banks got away with their crimes and the improper procedures that they engaged in. And one of the things that consumers really need to understand is if you're still using the language of robo-signing and forgery and fraud that absolutely occurred in foreclosure cases and is still very much a product of foreclosure cases in courtrooms all across the state of Florida. But if you're still using those words and thinking they mean anything in an individual court case, you're sadly mistaken by my personal experience. I think it's always important to reflect on where it is that we came from and how it got us here. And the fact of the matter is that we understand that between 2005 and 2008, the banks were permitted to go into courtrooms, engage in the most grossly abusive court practices and procedures, and still, in using those practices, get away with it and take consumers' homes back. Well, 2008, 2010, we all started to recognize that things were really wrong. Consumer justice attorneys across the state and frankly across the country started to document this and bring it in front of courts' attention, and courts started to pay attention to it, which Fast forward now into 2010, when this really was demonstrated in quite dramatic ways in court cases all across the state, when the attorneys general from all across the state began to held them accountable. Back then into 2012, there was finally this settlement, the national mortgage settlement in particular, where all of the allegations, many of the allegations that attorneys and consumer justice advocates had been demonstrating and documenting for years, was reduced to settlement known as the national mortgage settlement. The money that was provided as part of that is now being funneled back to the court systems. The court systems are using that to fund foreclosure judgments. Now, I'll continue to include this slide in here. It's a little bit off topic, but it's the BP settlement. We're doing a lot of work on that now because it's one of the few areas in consumer justice where we are paying benefits to consumers. Now, the question is, what can a consumer do to fight foreclosure? Well, the bottom line is, as I said earlier, you have to have an attorney. If you're going into a courtroom now as a pro se litigant, you're going to walk yourselves into trouble. And I want to talk about two things that have happened very recently that are very profound and make this point very dramatically. Consumers who are in foreclosure are oftentimes the target of con artists and scamsters. And just last week, I was in front of a judge where a consumer had once again become victim of a foreclosure rescue scam. On the one hand, you had the homeowner who was approached by somebody who said they were going to resolve their foreclosure problem. On the other hand, there was another consumer who rented out the home at the advice and counsel of the scam artists that were supposed to be helping the consumer or the homeowner. Now, what that case represents is that consumers need to be very careful, both those who are in your homes and anybody that might be trying to buy a foreclosure home or lease one out of foreclosure or whatever else. There are laws on the book that are supposed to protect consumers from things like this. The Foreclosure Rescue Prevention Act, Florida Statute 501-1377, provides that it's criminal to engage in these kind of activities. But the fact of the matter is they're hardly ever enforced, and it's a real bad thing. And there doesn't seem to be any willingness on the part of the government here at the state level, state's attorneys, attorney general, or anybody else to do anything to actually protect consumers from these things. If there were, they could shut them down instantly. But over and over again, what I find is that consumers who are aggressively solicited and targeted by these individuals and organizations, and quite frankly, a lot of times it's difficult to decide or decipher whether or not they are scams because they use official logos. You see the one up on the screen there is a Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And so oftentimes what happens is, as part of the solicitation, as part of the scam, they're using official government logos and in these quasi-government entities, and that's enough to scam people into believing that they can do something to assist them. Now, I'm going to include a link in here. That link right there brings us over to the Fannie Mae website. And one of the things that's so important for consumers to understand, and I'll put this link down here, is that what I call the wizard behind the curtain is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They are quasi-government agencies, but the reality is they are the ones that are pulling the strings on all of this. You know, us in the consumer justice space have gotten used, and consumers and in the press have gotten used to demonizing Bank of America, Wells Fargo, the servicers. But the reality is those servicers are really the bagmen, the debt collection activities, the actors, the fraud, the front organizations for the real party in interest, and that is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I encourage you people to get comfortable with that website, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and see the different servicing directives in there and see the regulations and rules that should apply to your individual circumstances, whether it be loan modification or a deed in lieu or short sale or in foreclosure. I think what you'll find, what we find most frequently, is that these things are being blatantly ignored. And a real troubling thing that I find, and I say this in defense of the banks that are filing these foreclosures, is that oftentimes judges in our court system don't care or don't understand at all the implication and the application of the wizard behind the curtain phenomena, the fact that the federal government is in fact pushing all of this and imposing, in many instances, requirements on plaintiffs, banks, and institutions that they quite simply cannot comply with. Now, I want to talk big picture stuff here because that's an important part of the practice and our focus here. We have very competent attorneys that work in this office. Jason and Michael, many of you guys know, do excellent legal work. But one of the things that sets us apart is this bigger picture that we're focused on all the time. Now, we all have been watching the press. We recognize these reports that real estate prices are increasing, inventory is low. We're talking even about a recovery. Well, as this Salon article demonstrates in a real dramatic way, this is a scam. And in fact, there is no real recovery that is occurring. But what's happening is through an artificial manipulation of the inventory and what's happening in court cases, it appears to be so. What this article does, and every time I present one of these articles, what I'll do is I'll put the link down here and encourage you to go back later and take a look at this article. But this is a Salon online article, which that picture there depicts a house down in Lake Worth, Palm Beach County. And what this article demonstrates is that when we are foreclosing and we're throwing our neighbors out into the street, this inventory, the house that was the target of the foreclosure, and the family that was target of the foreclosure, does not result in a house that gets back into the marketplace so that it can be rented out or sold back to another more deserving family. One of the themes that continues to be repeated, and frankly, it's being really pounded on quite dramatically right now, is that we have to get through this foreclosure crisis. We have to punish these homeowners that are sitting in here, that have been living for free, throw them out into the streets so we can get some good, quote-unquote, homeowner back into that house. But what this article demonstrates is that's not what happens. We throw our neighbor out into the street, and then houses stay vacant. They look like this house here. And this article demonstrates that house after house, neighborhood after neighborhood in that area, that's what happens. And, you know, West Palm Beach really is the model for what now is occurring across the state of Florida. This very aggressive court procedure, the court system unilaterally calling up cases on their docket, throwing homeowners in front of a court system and in front of plaintiffs that in some cases don't even want to be having trials and don't even want summary judgment, but that's what's occurring. Now, the magnitude of this is important. This next article here was just out last week, and it tells us that since 2007, 10 million people, 10 million Americans have been thrown out into the street as a result of this foreclosure problem. And it's important to recognize and acknowledge again that this is not the private money of banks or individuals that are the subject of these foreclosure proceedings. By and large, in the vast majority of cases, the lender at the heart of a foreclosure proceeding, the real party in interest, is Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. They are government-sponsored entities. This is the federal government. This is you and I as taxpayers that actually own these homes that were being foreclosed on, that are being thrown out, and their neighbors being thrown out into the street. We have to keep that in mind because it has a dramatic implication on what happens throughout foreclosure. Now, another big update here, and this is something that they're calling in the industry the Colorado problem. They're saying that what's happening out in Colorado, one particular foreclosure mill was targeted with some allegations of improper activity. And what they're saying is that these sanctions that have been awarded against this particular law firm and law office in Denver, when this lawyer turned essentially a whistleblower in state's evidence. I've got this up here right now, and I'll put that link up now. The reason why I want everyone to pay attention to this is I don't believe this is a Colorado problem per se. I believe that the allegations that are contained within this story, and if you Google foreclosure mill in Colorado, there are many other allegations. But I think what's going to happen is we're going to see that this is a problem that exists across the country, and that when the full specter of this finally gets realized, we're all going to be in a lot more trouble. And when I say we as a country, because again, the foreclosure plaintiff is really a myth. The vast majority of these foreclosure cases involve Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. You and I as consumers ultimately pay for all of this. What I want for all of us to do is to finally wake up. I want to see where taxpayers, where consumers, where citizens all across the country get more involved in this process as advocates, and not just focus on those people who are defendants in foreclosure cases, because that's really a small part of the story. every one of us in a community suffer in foreclosure. We suffer because of blight in neighborhoods where homes are just abandoned. We all suffer as taxpayers because we're paying for all of this. Now, I want to talk about what's happening here in the state of Florida with foreclosure. This law that was signed into effect by Governor Scott and the Republican-dominated legislature, misguided from the very beginning because it rests on the proposition that faster foreclosures are better, without taking into consideration at all these real parties and interests behind the scenes. That's one of the things that was most frustrating for me about the legislative process and watching this bill go through. There was next to zero consideration paid for the fact that the federal government really is the real party and interest, and more importantly, next to zero consideration paid for the fact that the banks and institutions engaging in the national mortgage settlement had admitted to much of the wrongdoing that we presented and we demonstrate over and over again in these cases. So again, the problem is the money that the banks paid, $25 billion was the propaganda, was the press releases. There's nothing near that. But millions of dollars have been funneled back down into a court system, which is being used to reward banks for their wrongdoing with faster and additional foreclosures. I'll go back to that slide right here, this $25 billion question. Again, $25 billion was the propaganda amount that was part of all the press releases. We haven't seen any follow-up on that. We do see, as part of the National Mortgage Settlement Monitor's report, reporting of second mortgages that have been reduced and reporting down of some principal reductions, but it comes nowhere near the $25 billion that was part of all those dramatic settlements. Now, again, that money that's been funneled back to the court system is being used to grind homeowners out into the street. The question that I have, and I encourage realtors to be thinking about, is what's going to be the impact of pushing all these foreclosures back out into the market? And will the national mortgage settlement and the very aggressive court action cause an actual crash of the real estate market? Something that can't be ignored in this space, and that is that this very real objective that our court systems are responding to is resulting in a much faster court process and, quite frankly, a reckless court process. I had a trial earlier in the week where it was set for trial, and the plaintiff came to court. We were ready to go, and because they didn't have a bank representative, and the lawyer, quite honestly, told the judge, Your Honor, the bank cannot get a witness down here to court to testify. Now, it's a major national bank, and for an attorney to suggest that this bank didn't want to bring a witness to court is part of the problem, but that is evidence of the much larger circumstance that we all engage in. I'm going to continue to present this slide right here. This is of a house. You can see the windows are foggy. It's obviously a multi-million-dollar house, 7,000 square feet plus, $41,000 a year in property taxes alone that are due. But you can see where it's just been abandoned right here. And with this house, I want to demonstrate and raise the question, for the multi-million-dollar mortgage that is on the books there, that has been abandoned by the bank, that multi-million-dollar mortgage that is, in fact, the property of the federal government in all likelihood, we could keep God knows how many tens, maybe hundreds of other people in their homes just for the value of that one. I wait for the time when Americans wake up to what's happening across this country. And I'm not just talking about the political environment. I'm talking specifically about the banking environment in which we live and the obscene, the aggressive, the corrupting power of the banks that they have on our entire system of government. This is obviously from a foreign country. I don't know, maybe it's France, looks like. But the fact of the matter is that Americans need to wake up to the fact that our government is not run by the people. It's not run by you and I as taxpayers. It's run by the banks and institutions that pay for the government, that pay for the election in office. Until people start to recognize the full reality of that circumstance, our political environment isn't going to change. Now, I talk repeatedly about this national mortgage settlement in the working group here, and just as I did last week, I'm going to encourage folks to make this conversation part of your daily advice, daily environment. You see, this is a LinkedIn group right here, and this is where the administrator of the National Mortgage Working Settlement Group is asking for consumers to come on there and share information about what's happening in their individual cases. I can tell you that we've had a number of conversations in here about the banks not fulfilling their obligations under the National Mortgage Settlement to engage in good faith loss mitigation efforts with consumers as they're required to under the National Mortgage Settlement Group. I encourage you consumer advocates out there, when you engage consumers, when you engage in the banks, be aware that this is a resource for you to report problems. Now, particularly professionals that are out there, respond as well to complaints when they're not complying with the terms of the National Mortgage Settlement. Now, a word of caution, please. Please use this responsibly. We don't want to clog up that system with improper complaints that aren't what are really being looked for. But if you do find as a consumer that you're not being treated fairly, you're not being treated as you should be under the terms of the National Mortgage Settlement, report on there. And again, this is one more, this is the National Mortgage Settlement website directly here. You as consumers, especially on this website, need to be on here, and you need to be making complaints when your mortgage modification isn't being processed properly. I have had some good results recently when consumers' modification, their efforts have been ignored by making complaints onto there. It's been tracked down relatively quickly. We have a state website here directly. The Florida Attorney General is supposed to be monitoring these things as well. There's a little website there. All manner of fraud should be being reported on there. I've yet to see whether there's any real success from there, but for what it's worth, it's on there. Make your complaints. Maybe we'll start to see some turn here in the state of Florida where consumers really will be protected. Now, back to this slide again, encouraging consumers to understand the BP claims process and to report claims, to make your claims to BP, because the reality is many consumers suffer damage as a result of the improper activities of BP. We continue to suffer those damages on a regular basis. The claims process is going to close relatively quickly here. You don't want to wait until the claims process is finalized. You want to be on there now making your claims so that when you get your documents together, you've got legitimate claims that are on there. I'll throw one more link up on there, which is explaining a little bit the claims process. That image there, of course, of the BP oil spill, that's what it looked like. They had this rig operating out in the Gulf of Mexico. BP and the other various partners that were operating that rig knew well in advance that there were real problems with what was happening. They ignored that, and as a result, it spilled millions of gallons worth of oil out in the Gulf, killed 11 people. But the spill-off of that, we're still being felt now. I talk to consumers all the time that maybe they operated a hotel out at the beach, and if you remember back to 2010, people didn't come to our beaches because they were concerned about what they were going to find. Was there going to be oil and tar rolling up on the beaches? But it wasn't just the people that operated out there at the beach. It was all of us that suffered as our businesses declined. And so the terms of the settlement provide that anyone can file a claim that's within one of the coastal areas, and on the website I provide the links for that information. But consumers very much are encouraged to file claims. Contact my office. I can explain a little bit more to you. Let me look and see if there's some questions on here that I can see. Here's the reality, and here's what I want to talk about with foreclosures very specifically. It used to be, as most of you know, that when we would get a foreclosure complaint, it would take the plaintiffs a significant amount of time to find the information we were looking for, which would allow them to present a proper case. We spend a lot of time doing good discovery, asking the kind of hard questions that should be asked in every single case. And I've yet to have a case in all of my years of litigating these foreclosure cases. I have yet to have a case where a bank responded appropriately to the request for information that we ask for. That's fairly significant. That says a lot about the state of foreclosures. But the reality is right now what we find is courts just ignoring that and allowing them to get away with it. See a question here. You know, that question there from Ron there, the problem that we have right now, and one of the biggest things that I encounter with consumers is you're reading things on the internet. There may be some good decisions in one state or another state, but the reality is those decisions have next to zero impact, and in many cases, absolutely zero impact on what happens on cases that are being litigated within an individual case. So, for instance, if you're reading some case in California and think that it has some impact, it likely has zero impact on what's happening in the state of Florida. And even when you hear these big class action cases, for instance, Bank of America is the target of some class action litigation that relates to their mortgage modification efforts. Well, that has zero impact on your individual case here in the state of Florida. And the reality is that even if that case is successful many, many years down the road, and in fact, they're able to prove that Bank of America did engage in some wrongdoing with regard to mortgage modification efforts, that won't do you any good at all when you're litigating a case here in the state of Florida. And the problem is that when consumers see these things about class action litigation, or mortgage modification, or whatever else, and they think that it's going to have some impact on their case, and they try and rely on that, it does nothing at all for them. So it's a real problematic thing here, because we all know the banks and institutions are engaging in wrongdoing, but it has little or no impact on your individual foreclosure case. Ron, I'm going to pull that case up here a little bit. I'm of course familiar with the Schott case, but you know, again, the thing to understand from this is that for Jason Schott, who may have had some initial success with Bank of America, the impact for any consumer in the state of Florida is zero. And one of the things that we all have to understand is that the legal environment is different for everyone. The legal environment that someone experiences in the state of Pennsylvania is completely different from anywhere else. And quite frankly, it's different state by state. So here in the state of Florida, on the west coast of Florida, the 6th Circuit, 13th Circuit, 12th Circuit down in Manatee County, largely we have had, I think, a very balanced, very responsible legal environment where pro se litigants and defendants are treated fairly. I hear reports from other parts of the state where I hear things that are quite concerning to me. But I mention that to support the proposition that even within a state, the environment is quite different from state to state. So, you know, to talk about precedent and things that are happening in other individual cases in individual states is a big problem for folks. I want to let your comment continue to go out there. But I'll tell you, I had a trial just yesterday, and it was a trial that we won. We got a defense verdict, but I find it very frustrating because it shouldn't be that hard. I mean, walking into this trial, the bank had done some really dumb things for many years, and they apparently realized it on the eve of trial. So the night before, they started filing all this evidence, which evidenced a lot of really bad conduct on their part. And as a result of that, and knowing how black and white and how improper the conduct was, I felt like walking in the trial, it was going to be a walk in the park, quite easy. But it was anything but that. Many hours long after this trial, and after demonstrating all these things, it still was like pulling teeth to get a defense verdict, which should have happened quite easily. We are having a lot of success on procedural motions leading up to trial. The warning, I think, to everybody is that, you know, trial is a very bad place. It can be very punitive towards consumers. We have to work to get these trials, these foreclosure cases concluded before it even gets to trial. And so for all you consumers out there that are sitting with cases that have been pending for many years now, you have to understand that we are in an environment where cases are moving more quickly, where judges are setting them for trial. And if you wait until trial to get an experienced attorney, you're not going to have a good outcome. You're going to be one of these consumers that winds up with a foreclosure that is a final judgment thrown out into the street under quite unfortunate circumstances. Coming up here on 45 minutes or so that we've been doing this, I try to keep this thing short. I encourage all of you, if you've got individual questions, to email me. I'll put my email address here. As you know, if you're an individual client, you're going to hear from us right away. If you have additional questions and you want some specific advice from us, feel free to give me a call or shoot us an email. I appreciate your time today. I'm going to sign off now and turn this off. Thank you very much.